Older generations really trusted habits over hardware when it came to home security. They kept their homes safe through routine, awareness, and leaning on their community, long before any fancy devices came along. For most of human history, home security just wasn't something you bought, installed, or upgraded. It was something you practiced, plain and simple. Folks back then lived in a world where mechanical locks were about as basic as it got, alarms just didn't exist, and getting help from the police could take hours or even days. Survival depended on those habits that cut down risk before trouble ever made it to the door. And let me tell you, these habits weren't just old superstitions or nostalgia talking. They were field-tested behaviors, shaped by scarcity, slow communication, and some pretty tough consequences. When hardware failed or wasn't around, habit was still there, solid as ever. Daily patterns back then were all about denying opportunity, not just stopping an intrusion. Older households set up their routines so breaking in would be inconvenient and risky. Doors got locked early and unlocked late, not because of any curfew, but because darkness made it easier for folks to move around unnoticed. Windows were opened and closed at set times so neighbors could spot if something was off. Tools were always put away in the same spot every evening so nothing could be grabbed and used by someone sneaking around. Lights weren't just for seeing either. They signaled presence and routine, not just lighting up a room. This whole approach, it really cut down on the number of unknowns. A house that stuck to strict patterns was just easier to keep an eye on, both from inside and out. Any little change stood out right away. So in practical terms, security was all about consistency. And honestly, folks today can use this too, by sticking to regular opening and closing routines, keeping random late-night activity around entrances to a minimum, and showing visible patterns that make a home easier to read for those who belong, but a whole lot harder for anyone looking to cause trouble. Observation replaced sensors because, well, people trained themselves to notice change. Without cameras or motion detectors, older generations relied on trained observation. Dirt paths, gravel, snow, and dust were monitored daily. A disturbed threshold or unfamiliar footprint really mattered. Gates were left at specific angles. A moved stone or shifted latch was noticed because it broke expectation. This required discipline and attention, not technology. This skill can still be applied today. Regularly walking the perimeter of your property at the same time each day creates a baseline. Anything out of place becomes obvious. Modern homeowners often miss these details because they outsource awareness to devices. The older approach teaches that awareness is a skill that improves with repetition and familiarity. Sound management was a deliberate security layer. Older homes were quieter by design. Floors creaked because they were meant to. Loose boards near entrances were tolerated or even preferred. Dogs were not pets in the modern sense, but living alarms. Livestock movement at night was listened to closely because animals react before people do. Silence was not comfort. It was a detection tool. Applying this today does not mean abandoning modern living, but it does mean reducing background noise near sleeping areas, understanding the normal sounds of your home, and recognizing when something just doesn't belong. Security improves when sound is treated as information rather than a nuisance. Community awareness functioned as a distributed early warning system. Older generations, well, they rarely lived in isolation by choice. Proximity meant accountability. Neighbors knew who belonged where, who worked which hours, and when something felt wrong. This was not surveillance for control, but shared survival. An unfamiliar person moving through an area stood out because they had no context. Modern survivalists can rebuild this layer intentionally. Knowing your neighbors, exchanging basic schedules, and watching over properties during absences recreates a system no single device can replace. Technology can fail or be bypassed. Human recognition is far harder to defeat. House layout and furniture placement, they really supported everyday security habits. Older homes were arranged with a real awareness of entry points. Sleeping areas were set up where sound would travel, so folks could hear if anything was amiss. Furniture was often used to block direct lines of movement through the house. And valuable items? Well, they were stored in places that took time and effort to reach, not really because of secrecy, but because that delay made it more likely someone would notice if something was wrong. This kind of mindset, honestly, still applies today. Rearranging your interior spaces to create natural obstacles, keeping bedrooms where you can hear entrances, and avoiding clear paths from the door to your valuables, all of that increases your home's security without needing to buy any fancy hardware. Delay, even now, remains one of the most effective defensive tools you can use. Routine maintenance acted as a sort of preventative defense, you know? Doors, hinges, latches, and frames were inspected constantly, not because folks were scared of break-ins every day, but because most failures came from neglect. A loose hinge could make noise at the worst possible moment. A warped door might not close up right. Maintenance, plain and simple, was security. Today, a lot of folks rely on locks while pretty much ignoring frames, screws, and alignment. Older habits remind us, though, that a weak structure can just defeat even the strongest hardware. Regular inspection and repair, well, those are just practical applications of this mindset. Psychological deterrence, mattered just as much as physical barriers. Older homes, they projected alertness. Tools near doors, for example, suggested readiness. Windows showed signs of use. Yards were maintained enough to indicate occupancy, but not so pristine as to signal wealth. The message was simple. Someone is here, someone is watching, and intrusion will be noticed. This principle still holds true. Homes that look lived in, monitored, and cared for, well, they deter opportunistic threats more effectively than expensive but silent systems. Security, it really does begin with perception. Perhaps, the most important difference is philosophical. Older generations did not believe safety could be delegated. Responsibility rested with the household. Habits reinforced vigilance. Everyone knew their role, from children closing shutters to elders listening for changes at night. For modern viewers, this is honestly the core lesson. Hardware supports security, but it does not replace discipline. When routines fade, devices become crutches rather than tools. Rebuilding habit-based security restores control. So applying these lessons in a modern survival context, well, it really strengthens your resilience. You can combine old habits with modern tools without any conflict at all. Go ahead and use cameras, but also take the time to walk your perimeter. Lock your doors, but remember to listen to your home too. Build community awareness right alongside those digital alerts. And, maintain predictable routines while still avoiding complacency. Habit, it creates layers that hardware alone just can't provide. Older generations, they trusted habits because, well, habits adapted, learned, and improved over time. Hardware, on the other hand, stayed static. In a survival context, adaptability is what wins out. Security that lives in behavior, it survives power outages, failures, and honestly, all kinds of change. If this breakdown added value to your understanding of historical security and practical survival, go ahead and subscribe to Battlefield of Survival, share this with others who take history seriously, and, keep these lessons alive by applying them, not just studying them. Battlefield Survival.